Hi, my name is Jessica Ramberg, the Director of Digital Media at the America East Conference. We are on our America East Three Pillars Academy digital series, which focuses on providing professional development and educational opportunities to administrators, student athletes, and coaches, both inside and outside of our conference. Athletic excellence, academic achievement, and leadership on and off the field, these are the three pillars of the complete student athlete of the America East Conference. We are joined with Steve Ditmore, Assistant Dean for Outreach and Innovation from the College of Education and Health Professions from the University of Arkansas. He will be joining our Three Pillars Academy digital series in this episode. Prior to entering higher education, Steve worked over 10 years in sport public relations, working 2 Olympic Games, working various sporting events such as the NCAA Final Four, Pan American Games, and has authored and co-authored many peer-reviewed articles, textbooks, and book chapters. We're very excited for Steve to join us here on the Three Pillars Academy digital series. Before jumping in, Steve, I'd love to just hear your experiences, where you're at now, and some of the research that you've been a part of.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. You make me sound somewhat important, which I don't feel as though I am, but I appreciate the introduction. And it's a privilege to be able to share some of my thoughts and some of my experiences with your audience and your stakeholders in the America East Conference. So I think you and I connected, or you connected to me via a piece that I wrote for Athletic Director U, which I hope that many of your administrators are receiving and reading on a weekly basis. It's a vertical publication as a part of the D1 Ticker franchise. And I got involved with them about a year and a half or so ago as an editor for their website and also as a contributing writer. And really my interest has lied in kind of the cross-section of sport and media, sport and social media, media rights, digital rights, things of that nature. Kind of stems from my background in sport public relations. I've always been a media guy, I guess you can say. We started off my career as a sports information director or assistant sports information director at Drake University. Also worked in sports information at the University of Minnesota. And then, as you alluded to, the experiences I had in the Olympic movement. And so I've really become kind of fascinated by, this tool that now exists that allows organizations to bypass traditional mass media and get their message directly to a consumer or an end user stakeholder, whoever that might be. And the piece I think that I wrote that you commented on is just the ability of coaches in particular to take advantage of this platform and reach prospective student athletes and to recruit them, and different strategies, different approaches to going about and utilizing that platform. It's not for everybody, and not all coaches feel comfortable doing that. And I think that's the first thing that everybody has to admit, is that they shouldn't try to be something that they're not, because one thing about social media, I think, is that it's an authentic voice and it allows the authenticity of an individual to come through. And I think those are valuable aspects of the platform, of the medium. And I think that coaches can certainly utilize that to their benefit.
Awesome. And as you've mentioned, or as we know, that social media plays this enormous role in our day-to-day lives. So first off, let's just start with, how can coaches use social media for recruiting?
Sure. So, the NCAA passed legislation that I think began in August of 2016 that kind of deregulated this medium a little bit, and it allows more frequent communication. It allows for the opportunity for coaches to engage directly, or at least call out prospective student athletes on the social media platforms. And I'm thinking, when I'm talking about these, I'm thinking primarily of Twitter and Instagram as being kind of the primary platforms on which this type of communication might be effective. And so it's an opportunity, I think, for coaches to do one of two things. One, certainly engage the prospective student athletes, which undoubtedly gets their fan base and other individuals involved in the process, in the communications process. But where I think the real value add lies is in coaches' abilities to kind of take a behind the scenes look, or provide an experience to prospective student athletes that showcases some of what an athlete or a prospective student athlete might experience when he or she comes on campus for an official visit. We all know that the NCAA regulates the number of official visits that prospective athletes can take. And this allows for kind of an ongoing dialogue or communication. And it allows them to see a personal side of the coach, whether he or she wants to bring them into their professional careers, their personal lives, kind of behind the scenes in the operations of their program, whether it's, hey, this is what a team meeting looks like. This is what our training table meal looks like for the day. This is what our student athletes are doing out in the community. It allows for all those different touch points that ordinarily have been restricted to really just kind of an in-home visit or an on-campus official visit. And this allows them to do that almost 24/7 and really create an environment where it's on demand for the student athlete. That's the great thing about social media, is it's an on-demand platform. So you may not hit the student athlete the minute that Instagram story is posted, but he or she may look at it 24 hours, 48 hours later, and it still has the same impact. So it's not as important to be getting them in the moment. It allows the prospective student athlete to really get it on their time rather than on the coach's time or on the organization's time. So I really see it as an advantage on the recruiting side of things. Obviously coaches are probably also in the business of trying to recruit parents and guardians of prospective student athletes. So this allows them to touch on some other talking points that they might want to have about what they believe in terms of growth for the student athlete and how they're going to prepare them for a career. Maybe it's hey, here's our academic counselor, and this is a conversation that we have with him or her that day. So that's really where I see coaches are able to utilize this. And I don't know if this was going to be a question that you're going to bring up, but I think one of the things that I wanted to make sure I pointed out is I think it's important that programs create a unified voice. And I know it's common for, say, Albany lacrosse to have a Twitter handle specifically for Albany lacrosse, and then the coach has one as well. But in my mind, those two things should be seamless and should be merged together and should be providing consistent messages, because the more fragmented organizations get by having individual Twitter accounts for coaches, individual Twitter accounts for programs, and then maybe an overarching one for the entire university athletic department, is that not everybody follows everything and not everybody's going to get the same information. So I think it's really critical that athletic departments as a whole, not just the coaches, but whether it's the media relations staff, communication staff, or the recruiting staff, or whomever that's running those accounts, really try to create consistency of message across those different accounts, and then also across the different platforms, because not all prospective student athletes are going to have Twitter accounts. Not everybody's going to have Instagrams and so forth.
Less than 10 years ago, prospective student athletes and their parents physically had to go onto campus, and that may have been their first interaction with the facilities, the coaches. What is it that power of that social media that coach can use, as you've talked about, to have that constant interaction with that prospective student athlete and their parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple ways to look at that. I mean, you can look at it from the prospective athlete perspective, and I think one of the things to me that across any sport is extremely powerful is that in the moment, and I'm thinking, that last little bit of an instruction that a coach is giving before the team runs out onto the field or on the court, or as they're getting ready to go run out the tunnel, that little inner sanctum area is really an area that I think can appeal to student athletes and really allows them to say, okay, if I were there, if I were at Vermont, or if I were at, whatever institution, what does it look like? What am I going to experience? And, the coach is obviously caught up in the moments, and he or she's not going to be able to run that. So that's where I think you need to have, whether it's a student assistant, a graduate assistant, a manager, somebody there with their camera and going into that. I mean, as you mentioned, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, this wasn't even really a possibility. But now, I think some of the most powerful images that you see in social media. And I know you guys are in the Northeast, and the Boston Red Sox are going to be in the World Series here. But some of those powerful images are when the team runs out onto the field, or the team's celebrating in the locker room, and the social media person is right there celebrating with them and getting doused with beer and champagne and everything. And those things to me just are really emotional and powerful, that can really help sway perhaps a player or a prospective student athlete and say, yeah, I like what that coach is saying right before I go out onto the field. I want to go play for him or her. So I think that's one component. The other thing then I think is, what coaches are traditionally going to talk about to kind of the parents or guardians aspect, which is, okay, this is education first and foremost. This is what we're going to do to provide for prospective student athletes and student athletes when they get here. These are the types of services. This is what we're going to focus on, or this is what a day looks like. I know a number of teams do this now, where they'll just hand it over to the players as well and say, hey, walk us through a day in your life. This is the gear that we're getting. These are the shoes that we got. This is our dorm. This is where we go and we eat lunch. This is our main academic building that we go to, where we have classes, and, just kind of a real authentic. And I think that's, again, and I've said that word previously, but I think that's the one thing about social media that makes it so powerful, is kind of the authenticity that comes with it. It's hard to dress those things up. It's hard to, script out social media and have it look and be effective. And I think those kind of spontaneous stream of conscious thoughts make everybody seem human, seem approachable. And I think at the end of the day, those are traits and characteristics that prospective student athletes are going to look for and they're going to value.
On the end of where a coach is building their brand on their social media, being authentic, celebrating the big wins they have, both academically and athletically, do you feel opening that space for their personal lives, is that a balance that they can have with their professional, personal? What are some risks that are involved with that? Sure. And how can it be positive?
So a coach, I would never advise a coach or anybody really to do that unless they were willing to take on some of those risks. And there are risks that come with that. I worked with a colleague at Mississippi State, and we completed a study last fall in which we were looking at social media posts of college football programs during the period that ranged from Thanksgiving, or kind of the end of the season, to early signing, and wanted to see how that impacted recruiting. And that was a period of time where here at the University of Arkansas, our head football coach, Brett Bielema, had been relieved of his duties. And, you go back and you look at his timeline, and one of the things he's posting about, well, he had just had a baby daughter not long ago. And so he was posting pictures of her. And, you look at what the responses are that come from the fan base, and they're not positive. They're very negative, and they're somewhat hostile in some ways, spend more time worrying about winning rather than, this. So a coach shouldn't be doing this unless they are willing to accept the unfortunate side of social media. I still am a proponent of it and think that the positives far outweigh the negatives, but it should be something that they're going to be feeling comfortable and being authentic in. And not every coach is that way. And two of the people that we studied, or two of the programs that we studied, Clemson and Alabama, Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban, neither of them have personal Twitter accounts. They rely only on the Alabama football or the Clemson football accounts to do that. So they obviously don't feel comfortable with that. And that's part of their personality, and that's fine. But for coaches that are engaging, Jim Harbaugh at Michigan's another one that's very active in this space, but he's also got a team behind the scenes that helps him kind of craft the message. But those that are very active in the space, I do think it allows them to kind of create a personality or a brand, as you alluded to. And at the end of the day, I know that there's multiple ways to look at college recruiting. At the end of the day, I think most student athletes will sign with a coach rather than a program, rather than a university, but they're being sold by the coach, and they want to be comfortable with the coach's personality and the coach's brand. And so, they've got to be prepared for the negativity that may come that way. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of upside that can come along with it.
And now, talking about maybe there's a new coach or a coach that hasn't been in the space of social media, and maybe they're hesitant to join that social space. What kind of tips or encouragement or even things of how they could start becoming aware of the programs and just social media in general, since it's a huge space for prospective student athletes and even for their current team members that they have on their team.
The platforms that lend themselves well to this are, as I've alluded to, Twitter and Instagram. I personally am not a big Snapchat person. I haven't quite seen the appeal to it. It's maybe not my age, my demographic, whatever. So I haven't gotten into that one as much. But Instagram, anything that's visual oriented, I think is what makes Instagram and Twitter so good. Twitter, by virtue of integrating a number of ability to upload videos and multiple pictures on the same tweet now, and even expanding it from 140 characters to more than that. So, those things have made those platforms, I think, a little bit richer for this. And those are places that I would start if I were getting involved and getting new to this. And I think the other thing too is, it seems like a little bit of a, kind of a understood aspect of it, but I think that coaches need to be able to create a persona and a handle, so to speak, that speaks directly to who they are. They shouldn't try to hide behind it, So whether it's Coach Jones, Binghamton, or whatever it is that is going to differentiate and identify them specifically, I think is important, coming up with that brand. And we know that coaches transfer. They'll lose a position, they'll gain a new position, they'll go to somewhere else. And so to take that brand with them, there has to be an appropriateness enough of generic language in that handle that allows it to transfer over somewhere else. So, if it is a Coach Jones, it's a fairly generic last name. Maybe you want to do something different or something add-on like the university or some initials or, whatever that is. But I think in terms of creating that brand, they have to be cognizant of what they're creating at the beginning and what platforms they're using.
And so often we think of big time programs and their coaches and them on social, as you had mentioned before. But what opportunity for these niche sports, not just basketball, not just football, but all these different programs in between, what's the opportunity there that they can capitalize in this social space as coaches and looking for recruits and potential student athletes?
I think you've hit on exactly where another big value add for social media is, and why coaches in kind of these niche sports, whether it's, not kind of non-mainstream. So I'm thinking a lot like ice for America East audiences, ice hockey, lacrosse, field hockey, these types of sports that have very loyal fan bases, very loyal audiences that want to follow these teams. But at the same time, they're not going to be picked up on the mainstream media sites. They're not going to have that broad-based distribution that we think of with, certainly the Power 5 schools in FBS, but even as you get down into the FCS caliber schools, it's not really going to be as prominent there. Now, having said that, of course, within those niche sports, ice hockey, lacrosse, you've got teams in your conference that are very strong and that play with the big boys on a level playing field. And so from that standpoint, they are right there with all the FBS Power 5 schools. But the coverage of those sports hasn't yet cracked it. And it's interesting. I had a meeting prior to this, but I logged on to Twitter real quickly, and I noticed that NBC tweeted out something today that they are coming in summer 2019, the new Premier Lacrosse League, which is the new rival professional league that started as kind of a rival to the Major League Lacrosse. And so here's a sport that we think of historically as kind of this niche sport that is going to have at least a traditional big-time mainstream media outlet, NBC, and I didn't look, but I assume it's like NBC Sports Network or one of those things. But still, the brand cachet that comes with NBC that goes along with that really has an opportunity to grow that sport. So I think that there's some real opportunities for those in those particular sports to come together at their conference, or I don't know if conference meetings is the right thing, but coaches meetings, or, a lacrosse conference or a field hockey conference or something like that, and really talk about, hey, this is how I'm using it. maybe you could use it this way, or, that's a great idea what you're doing. We should incorporate this. And I think it will kind of grow organically from there, where the niche sports community really come together. Because at the end of the day, if you're a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old playing one of those sports, you're seeking information about that sport. And where are you going to go to get that? Because it's not going to be on the mainstream media sites.
And now talking about that on the other end, as a prospective student athlete, using social media, looking at coaches, looking at their programs or institutions, how is that helpful for that prospective student athlete as they're using this platform for helping make their decision?
Well, I think it creates an opportunity to be aware of programs. Certainly, I mean, program awareness is one of those things. I know you and I chatted prior to recording this, and so that I've got a 13-year-old son who's a very avid lacrosse player, and depending on which day of the week it is, he thinks he's either going to Syracuse to play lacrosse, or he's going to Marquette, or he's going to Albany or someplace like that. And invariably he's going to those platforms, into those accounts for those teams, and he's finding that information because it doesn't exist anywhere else. And the other thing then is that those are the types of platforms, those are the types of things that today's 13, 14, 15-year-old is using. I mean, they know more about what goes on in the world because they get it off their Instagram feed and their Instagram stories than you or I probably do. It's certainly, I mean, I try to one-up my son and say, hey, did you hear this? Oh yeah, I saw that already. So I'm way behind the times. I'm the old guy because I'm not glued to that the way they are. But again, I think the combination of content that those programs are creating really helps create and drive that awareness and creates prospective student athletes. And I'll take it a step further is, being in Northwest Arkansas, and again, I apologize, it becomes a little too lacrosse centric, but it's the community which I'm most familiar is. It's hard to find a Division I program in Northwest Arkansas. The closest geographic programs are in Milwaukee at Marquette, or in South Bend at Notre Dame, or maybe Denver. They're about equidistant. So we drove and went to Marquette and went to a camp at Marquette last year just because geographically we could get there easily. But now that my son's been there, now he's paying attention to it and he's seeing what other kind of content they're delivering and keeping that engagement going from his experience there. And that, I think, is as much what programs can be doing, is reaching out to that up and coming generation of prospective student athletes, regardless of the sport, and going to meet them on their terms rather than forcing the prospective athlete to come to campus and go with the traditional official visit. And this is where you meet a professor, and this is where you go meet some players, and you go sit on practice and do all those things.
So now you've talked about your son and seeing him looking towards those programs on social media, looking at those current players, the coaches. You as a parent, as you've talked about being involved in that process, how do you see social media playing a role both in your son's life and in your life as you continue on this journey towards one day your son becoming a student athlete?
Well, I mean, I hope that that's what happens if he has the ability and it's, something that he wants to continue to pursue. I have no designs that, that's going to happen. But, it is one of those things where I get turned on to accounts because he shows me things, and they're equipment accounts and they're third-party accounts, again, specific to lacrosse, like the Lacrosse Network, which is very active on YouTube and on Instagram and helps kind of promote the sport across all levels. And I think that's one of the great things about niche sports is that you have these kind of third-party aggregators that are looking for any content, whether it's college, whether it's high school, whether it's youth, and being able to blend all of those things together. And so yeah, the fact that I know that the Premier Lacrosse League has an agreement with NBC is a direct result of being turned on to an account that my son turned me on to, which is, hey, did you see this? And so as a parent, what I would say to, any parents, I don't know how many would be in your audience here, but, paying attention and embracing what your son or daughter is finding in terms of these social media feeds, and really kind of discerning which ones are appropriate, which ones are really going to be value added. And certainly the official accounts of any college program, any college coach would be right up there at the top, and they can provide, whether it's feedback like, hey, did you go out, a coach can say, hey, did you go out and play wall ball today? Just on Twitter. I mean, that's a good subtle reminder to a 13-year-old that he needs to put down Fortnite and go out and play wall ball, because that's what a college coach is looking for, not whether or not he can ride a llama on Fortnite.
But kind of touching base on that, rewinding a bit, how coaches are using social media as a tool for recruiting, where they're looking at prospective student athletes' accounts, their social media, seeing them deeper level than just that athlete, but as that human. So if we go back, kind of back to coaches and their social media use in recruiting, what are just those risks that you have to think about as a prospective student athlete that you're putting out on your social media that ultimately helps the coaches recruit you to their programs?
Sure, absolutely. And I think that's a very important point that we have yet to touch on, is that it does go both ways. I mean, as much as what the coaches are putting out content-wise is try to recruit prospective student athletes, the reverse is also true, in that coaches should be monitoring, without a doubt, the social media profiles of prospective student athletes. And I think that's easy to do, because I think if even if the prospective student athlete has a protected account, if they get a request from the head coach at a university at Stony Brook or something, they're going to get a head coach request to follow. The student athlete's going to say, yeah, heck yeah, I'm all for that. But then the prospective student athlete may forget that they're being followed by that individual, and may slip up and may post something silly, something immature, because at the end of the day, these are all teenagers, and I get it. They do things that they may later regret. So it's a tough balance. I think that, again, some sort of parental guardianship, ownership of oversight of the student, prospective student athlete at that point, is important. And that I think is something that a coach can certainly see. Hey, this kid is not doing these things. This kid is posting about the time that he went and helped read to a kindergarten class or a first grade class. Well, that's maybe the type of character that we want into our program. And so I think, without a doubt, this is definitely a two-way street, and I appreciate that you brought that up. And it may be that if a coach is putting out something that is authentic to him or her, it may turn off a prospective student athlete too. They might say, well, I don't really want to study that hard. If the coach is going to be hounding me about this, maybe that's not the place. Well, at the end of the day, that saves anxiety on both ends, because the athlete learns that's not what I want, and the coach learns that's not the type of student athlete that I want in my program. So again, I think the monitoring of this is important, and kind of that two-way street, if you will.